G'day, podcasters. Welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations. I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, 25-4 Coffee, for troopers, by troopers. For all your coffee needs, head to www.254.com.au. G'day, welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is former Warrant Officer Class 2, Nathan Tolman, retired. And he has joined us today to talk about his 22-year career in the Australian Defence Force, and he deployed multiple times to Afghanistan and also throughout the world. He's got quite a story to tell, and yeah, it's an absolute honour and a privilege to catch up with him. So, Nath, g'day, mate. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having us.
Nah, mate, it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on. So, Nath, before we get started, mate, let's talk about, before you joined the army, let's talk about you as a young fella. Where'd you grow up, and any brothers and sisters, and did you play any sport?
Yeah, so I guess it's my history in growing up. It's one that fluctuates. So I grew up in Blacktown, and I was born in the Western Sydney suburbs in 1981, so it puts me at the 41-year mark now. Feels like a lifetime ago. And growing up at the time, I thought it was quite normal, my upbringing. I come from a family, 4 siblings. That's 2 brothers and a sister, all younger. And mum was a, let's say, single mother. She had numerous partners throughout. We all have different fathers, and out of my siblings and myself, I was the only one who didn't know who my father was. I didn't find out that until later on in life, but, it was pretty normal for me growing up. I did use sport as a bit of a way out, and, I had a great, immediate family, grandfather, grandmother, who were always there for me, and I guess I can see now why they were so close and why I was so close to them is, growing up without a father, I needed a male role model. And that's where my granddad come into it and gave me some of the values that I still carry this day. Yeah,
right. And so obviously you grew up, you sort of, your story, mate's a little bit different to most. Like, you grew up in Housing Commission, where you could have gone either way. Like, you could have gone down the crime path or the path that you chose to go into the military. And I guess your grandfather was that sort of influential person for you. And was that sort of you got to 17 and went, okay, I need to take shape of my life and head down that army path, sort of?
Yeah, I guess so. My granddad, he did set the tone for me. He did rule with a firm hand. And I won't say that there was any domestic violence against myself by my grandfather at all, but, he taught me some good values, how to stand up for myself. And he did see, my mum's toxic relationships, with the partners that she had, in the first 10 years of my life. Some of them were drug addicts. I'm talking, the likes of methadone, recovering heroin addicts, a lot of pot in the house, a lot of needles. There wasn't uncommon to find a needle in the house and a bong sitting around. And even though mum didn't endorse it or condone that, but it was just the way I grew up. So I knew at early stages in life what drugs were all about and the effect they had, especially when you're seeing someone going on the nod on a daily, or, falling asleep with cigarettes in their hand type stuff. Which, I guess I was looking for a strong sense of leadership from an early age. And I could have gone down that same pathway easy. Quite often I would be hanging around drug clinics, especially at Blacktown. They had a methadone clinic outside there. I'd be there frequently on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday with one of mum's partners, and they were the people that I was always around. There was other boyfriends who were alcoholics, and they definitely ruled with a firm hand, and would definitely cop a flogging. But I do look at the positives that those male influences. Yeah, like one of them, he got me into footy at an early age. At age 8, he took me over the footy paddock across the road and signed me up. And the good thing was he had a car; he could get us to the games. And same with my brother. So yeah, that's I guess the influences, and they're the negative influences in my early childhood that I guess I wanted to step away from. Yeah. Even though, they may have had a job or a car, I knew I could be better than that. And I just surrounded myself with decent mates and decent people, kids who loved to play footy and would always be at the front, riding around on bikes. It was that 80s culture and Western Sydney culture. So I thought it was okay at the time, but, I was pretty rough on mum. I wouldn't hesitate to swear, call her names, call her a bitch, C-word, whatever I could if I couldn't get my own way. My brother and I would fight, couldn't control us, kick holes in the wall, punching holes in the wall. It was fibro house. And funny enough, that house is just, I think it's just gone up for sale as well, because my cousin still lives down there, and he's sent me a picture of that Housing Commission house, which still looks the same and brings back some memories actually. So, and that's where my granddad come into it. He would, I guess, spoil me a little bit more than my other siblings, because I was, kind of his pride and joy growing up. And I lived with them from a very young age, because there was conflict in the house with mum's partners, and I was having punch-ons with, a grown adult. Luckily he was stoned, I think, at the time, so I could get it over him when I was, 10 to 12, and I decided to live with my grandparents, and there was some toxicity in the house, and I just wanted to get away from it. And
so what was your first job, mate, when you were growing up?
First job, a paper boy. I was a paper boy in Western Sydney suburbs, pushing the wheelbarrow around the old telly, and after school, I'd go up to the paper shop. The winners were the women's days and new ideas for the old ladies, and they'd leave their money under the mat, and $3 a pop, and I think I get something like 12.5% of whatever I sold. So, out of every dollar, it's 12.5 cents. So, I had my own pocket money and I could buy my own things. So, not that we didn't get much. I bought my own bikes and skaties and rollerblades and my own things, which was great as a young fella. So that was pretty much my first job, and it sort of it taught me some good values. That if you work hard, you will have nice things. And that set the tone for when I was going through high school. Potentially I might even join the army, but it wasn't the first choice. I wanted to become a police officer. So I thought I'll do a few years in the army, and my first job outside of school was I was making concrete ornaments and gnomes, like bench seats and all that. So that was great. I was earning a couple $100 a week, and had my own car at the time, which my granddad helped me out with, and I was paying him off. Fortunately he was pretty kind, and he eventually just went, I'm sick of waiting on the money, mate. Just don't worry about it. Nice.
And then you in March 2000 you decided to serve in the army. You joined up. So what? Obviously, you mentioned your grandfather, and you mentioned your first job outside. What was that? What was the driving factor for you to go? Was it a willingness to serve, or what was it, Nathan?
I think it was a willingness to serve, and going back to my teenage years, I think it was realising that I'm not going to be able to step into a job. Like most kids around the area that I grew up with went to school, they had intentions to go to university. I didn't have that drive, I guess, to learn. I went to school because it was, social. It was a place to go. And, I got to hang out with my mates, go to the beach. And I just wanted to finish year 12 because I knew that having your year 12 certificate, whether it was a UAI, your tertiary entrance ranking, whatever they called it back then, was going to be beneficial. I just wanted my HSC as a certificate so I could, hopefully set myself up for a decent job, potentially joining the police force. So, I knew that I didn't have that luxury of just walking into a trade or knowing somebody that could hook me up with a nice job. So I wanted to go out and do something for me. And I guess once I was a year into my job, and I turned 18, I'm like, okay, this is a good time. And at that stage, I think it was around 1999, and that's when In Effect kicked off. So East Timor was all over the news. The army ads were, they were in their prime. 13-1901, and those great ads where tanks are rolling through, helicopters cammed up, dudes on boats, just sneaking up and out of the water. they just sold me in the music. No. Yeah, that was.
Actually, I remember those.
Yeah, they were
as a young fella.
awesome.
Yeah, I remember them.
They should bring them back. We're on a recruiting drive right now. Bring them back. Yeah.
Well,
I think.
mate,
Yeah.
I mean, you only got to look at the state of affairs, mate, at the moment.
Yeah. Retention's a problem.
Yeah, maybe they need to bring them back, mate. Maybe they,
Yeah. What they don't show us the real truth when you're out there on a range picking up the brass after a shoot or something, eh?
Well, you know all too well of that. So, yeah, and then signed up, and then was it always infantry for you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So, what led to that? I signed up out of Newcastle. Come off the beach one afternoon, walked in, and I had long hair back then, longer than what I've got now, actually. And I walked into the recruiting office, and there was this big dude. He was sitting there with his sleeves rolled up, tats out. He was just a big, fit guy. He looked like a early Winfield Cup type rugby league player. And I'm like, this dude, he looks like he's pretty fit. And he did say that he was infantry, and what was I looking for? And I said, infantry, it's what I knew. And I'd read a few of they had magazines back then, Australian New Zealand Defender, which had. And I knew infantry because they were the ones being televised rolling through Dilly, in contacts, and it just looked like the job for me. So I guess the fitness impact was there, and he was a good big dude. I'm like, maybe that could be me one day, even though I was this scrawny little surfer guy. First thing he said was, get a fucking haircut, Goldilocks, and we'll see how we go. So he handed me a takeaway pack, and I discussed it with my grandparents, and they knew that's what I wanted. And I started my recruitment process from there. So jumped through all the hurdles, medicals, all the fitness testing, went down to Sydney. I think they put us up on the cross that night. Yeah, but it was pretty tame. Pretty tame. We went to a few little bars and that, but no drinking because, it was just what we wanted, because I was also with a bunch of guys who were also going through the recruitment process. I come back from the medical, and I needed to have an ingrown toenail removed, and so I'm like, okay, this is going to take some time, and I'd always suffered with them. So I think it took a good few months. And at the time I wasn't working because I thought, it's going to happen soon. So I quit my job. Wasn't going to make garden gnomes forever. It was interesting. I was eager and anxious just to kick it off. I didn't know anything about the army other than what I've read and seen on TV. Finally I had the ingrown toenail removed, got the ticket of approval, and off I went on the 28th of March 2000.
Right. And then so you head down to basic down at Kapooka, and mate, what was that like? Was that a culture shock when you got down there?
It was a culture shock, just being received and stating the oath down in Sydney. Said goodbye to the grandparents. And at the time, I think even my ex-girlfriend when I was young come down, and we'd called it off at that stage, and and everyone said goodbye, and on the bus I was. So back then I was I think I was pretty withdrawn, especially around people I didn't know. So, the trip itself on the bus, it was pretty quiet for me because I was going into the unknown, and as I said, I didn't know anyone had been in the military before. As soon as we arrived, it hit us. There was the old MPs on the bus, dogs, sniffers, searching our gear, asking for anything we had to hand in. I've said it before that it's what set the tone for MPs, and my opinions on them, they were arseholes then.
Mate, I think most veterans have the same opinion of MPs. I think there ain't too many that are, that say a good thing about them. But they've got a role.
That's right.
And, but yeah.
But I will say that I've met some top MPs, and I'm glad to have served with some of them.
And mature, mate, long time down the track. You see different. You see as a young 18-year-old, it's like, who are these guys? Like, who's this like authority? What are you like? And mate, everyone's like that when you're that age. You're like, piss off. Like,
that's right.
But years down the track, you see that they've got a purpose.
Well, I think it's flipped now because it's core enlist for MPs, so they enlist as MPs, where you used to have some sort of rozo and done some time in the military before you went over, and you earned your time, earned your hooks. Yep. Now you go in as a digger. Yeah, right. Yeah, you go in core enlist as an MP. So. Yeah, right. Yeah, so maybe it's gone back the other way where, they're throwing their weight around early. Some 18-year-old with his speed camera on the base. Yeah.
Mate, all credit So you get down there, and then what do you remember of basic, and what was the hardest part of basic training for you?
To be honest, it's the memories aren't too fond. It was a 6-week course then. Everything was rushed, but the thing that stands out is just the absolute beastings you would get from some of the staff. I'm talking verbal. It was verbal abuse, and now it'd probably be considered as like bullying. And I do remember the section commanders that were into me, and I remember their names quite clearly. I won't name them now, but they were absolute pieces of shit. It wasn't mentoring at all. It was, if you weren't up to standard, you were just getting yelled at. And I didn't relate too well to that. It took me a long time to adapt. And what set the tone for me in the first few days during our medicals again, they identified I had another ingrown toenail. So, and I'd always suffered with them. It hurt me, when I was playing footy. And
I've had them too, mate. They suck. And I've had them operated on too, and they sucked. They're just... And you stub your toe and you just go... Yeah,
kicking a bed sheet, and put you into pain. And it's just, something I'd never wish upon anyone, really. They're pretty bad. Yep. But I had to have another one removed. So straight away, I'm on restrictions. I'm put into runners for 2 weeks, and I'm marching behind the rest of the platoon when everyone else is... kicking about normal. So straight away, I'm that guy. I've got that stigma.
You're trying to be the grey man.
Yeah, definitely wasn't the grey man because it was, I was the guy at the back, the linger. Linger, get up the back. Yeah. Fuck, here we go. So I didn't even know what it was. So there were some, I guess, negative leadership role models straight away, and I vowed never to be like those people. Yeah. So it was pretty much abuse. And even during counselling sessions, it's like, I see the way you look at me, recruit Tolman, I know you want to fight me. And I'd be like, shit, I've never been in a fight in my life, really, and I don't want to fight you. I just want to get through this place. But, the biggest thing that stands out in my mind is the way they treated us on the shooting range. It was absolutely terrible. If you weren't performing, you get a quick lesson on how to breathe, how to shoot, do a few dry drills, pass your test. And even then, the pressure is just, it's up there. Yeah. And the pressure they put on you on the shooting range, it just wasn't right. I think the methodologies used back then were the incorrect ones, and hopefully I made a change down the track. Fast forward 15 years when I was there. Anyway, it was just pure abuse, and I couldn't shoot because I'd never held a rifle before. Come off the beach. I'm used to carrying a board and stuff, not a rifle. And I think I learnt a little bit from the guys who were, the country boys and the guys who applied themselves in shooting before and used marksmanship techniques. But it wasn't until the marksmanship training section come down and spent some time with me, when everyone else was at Canberra doing their war memorial visit, which you got to do during your stay. But I wasn't. I was shooting shit, so I had to retest. But they actually took the time and showed me how to shoot, the correct breathing techniques, squeezing the trigger, putting a pen on the rifle, just making sure it stays in its balance there when you release. And those little tools, I passed it the first shoot afterwards and I'm like, shit, I could have gone to Canberra if someone showed me and took the time. So I always remembered that because, it's something that...
Well, I suppose, mate, it's something, it's not natural. Like, it's, it's not a natural thing to, like, it's you're learning your craft. Like anyone, I suppose anyone out there just thinks you pick up a gun and just, there's a technique to.
That's right.
You got to aim. You got to look at where you're aiming, and you got to, you can't just, like you got to learn these things, and it takes time. And it's as you say, mate. Once you were shown it, you're on your way then, and you just honed in those skills and muscle memory and got better and better as the years went on. But at first, mate, it's like any new skill. You've got to learn. And you start from somewhere. You've got to crawl before you walk, and then you've got to walk before you run. So
yeah, and they just instilled this fear in you, and I think it's incorrect. Back then, I'm even left eye dominant, right-handed shooter. I should be the opposite way. I should be a left-handed shooter. I should have been converted. Yeah. Didn't realise that for 15 years. So that's all right, though. But, I learned to adjust. Yeah. And, just that was probably the most traumatic thing for me then. But, I got through. I've read my report I found a few years ago, and it was just slow to adapt. And I guess that was when I started realising, this ADHD thing does have an effect, and it was always distracted. And I was only learning by being shown something like a one-on-one. Someone taking time. Hands-on was always me. I couldn't just sit there and learn by PowerPoint. And then just go and do it. It sort of set the tone for me, and that I didn't want to just do the bare minimum. I wanted to actually succeed and be known as the person that is quite successful and can do it well. Yeah. But that wasn't it. It wasn't the case. I was, back to that linger, the dude who can't shoot. Yeah. But I did make some great mates throughout that time at Kapooka. Yeah, right. And there's no prouder moment than marching out and seeing your family. And, the Army looked after my family. We couldn't afford accommodation, and they put us in the old service accommodation down there. And that was the first indication that, hang on, the Army as a business or an organisation, maybe they do look after your family. A lot of people would say different, but that set the tone for me. Going, hang on, this is a good career.
And then you go up to Singleton after that, and you go to initial employment training. And what was Singleton like compared to, if you thought Kapooka was in your face, what was Singleton like?
Singleton, it was in your face only when you weren't performing. So I started adapting a little bit more through Singo, and at the time it was a 6-week course. So I was put in the platoon. I marched in with I think about a dozen of the guys from Kapooka. We formed a close bond, and it was in week 4 that I had an injury. It wasn't until after a 10-kilometre pack march. So I finished it, completed it, and I think I walked in and I'm like, oh, something's a bit sore there. Turned out it was a stress fracture. I couldn't continue training then, so straight away I was back squatted. You went to a holding platoon to recover for 6 weeks or so, and that was just mind-numbing. I couldn't really do much. I was sitting in the pool, just floating around, doing the rehab. Yep. The good thing was you were allowed out on weekends, so I could go home, visit family, so that sort of kept me going a little bit. But once I got back into a platoon and I was ready to go, they'd switched the program over and the course over to 10 weeks. So I just pretty much start from scratch, which is great because I got to do all the shooting again, which I knew that even though I'd struggled through Kapooka, through Singo, I started learning and picking it up a little bit easier, and I wasn't part of the bottom of the percentile and the retesters, but some of the things I had to retest with, but I did find that I was pretty good on the machine gun.
Right.
So I could handle that pretty well as opposed to the rifle.
Okay.
So I enjoyed it, and I got to do it all again, and finally marched out from Singleton in 2000, and then I was posted to Singleton, so part of the training support platoon. So the options were you could put in for wherever you wanted to go. However, you may not get that. I guess they dangled the carrot for us. For half of our platoon would stay and support the other IETs, play enemy, etc. So, but the benefits were, and that's the carrot, was you could have a posting of your choice. May not be 100%, but it was closer to. So, and I wanted 3RR because 3RR was sold for me during my time at Kapooka because there was a section commander there who was all about, jumping out of planes. It's all about wearing your wings and being professional and going to recon. He sort of set the tone for me there, and I thought it was great because I'd never been in a plane. And so I wanted 3RR, and it was based in Sydney, which is pretty close to my family because I'd never been too far from them. So, Singo, and then training support for 6 months. Supported training, and then finally got my posting order for 3RR.
Yeah, right.
So, and that was in 2001.
So what was that like, mate? Finally, after a bit of a well, I suppose maybe a false start, and then getting to 3RAR. What was that like for you?
It was exciting. I was pumped. I knew that I'd probably start at the bottom of the pile, and that the guys were coming out of Interfet. So I knew the seniority down there. I was preparing for, let's say, if I wasn't performing a hard time. Yeah. I figured that they'd bonded over Interfet, and there'd be guys walking around with medals, and with the reputation was great for 3RR. So I thought at the time it was just we were known as the good old red-headed stepchildren, right? Because we were so far down south, but they trained hard, they worked hard, and they got to jump out of planes, and they got a bit of extra money for jumping out of those planes. So I guess for me, the reputation and the opportunity to go and jump out of an aircraft, even though I'd never been, that was my priority, is to get my wings and to earn the wings. You wore the maroon beret, and even though that maroon beret was given to you when you marched in, you hadn't earned it. The way you earned your wings, do your para course over a 2-3 week period, whatever it was, down at Nowra, and then you get to wear your wings on your para smock. So once you had the wings on the para smock, and the para smock was worn a certain way, and even in summer, guys would be proud rolling around in their para smocks, 30 degrees, and you're still wearing your para smock because it has your wings on it. Yeah. And I've still got that smock to this day.
Yeah,
and,
right.
It was a jumper psychological, but, the wings kept us warm.
So mate, for people who aren't aware, can you tell us a little bit about the combat capabilities of a paratrooper as opposed to, say, a regular infantry soldier, and the difference? Like, what was the role of 3, and for people who maybe don't have that military, and they've probably seen Band of Brothers or something like that. So can you explain to us a little bit about it?
It was just an insertion capability to get mass troops into one location and disrupt the enemy as much as possible on the ground and create absolute chaos and confusion. So when you jump into an area, and the old saying is, we're paratroopers, we're supposed to be surrounded. That is correct. We fight from the inside out. So it's the old, look at it as the Trojan horse.
Yep. From Troy.
You get out of that aircraft, and the idea is to get from point A to point B onto the ground as quick as possible. RV, move to your rally points, and then start fighting your way out. And then link up with other units, other ground units, or infantry units, or whatever you need to do. A lot of the time, the insertion method was in place to secure airfields. So we could get aircraft in, and we never had the opportunity to experience that in wartime, but lots of exercises and jumping. So that was the main difference, and it was different from anything that any other battalion was doing. And the APCs didn't interest me. The Bushmasters at the time, up in 6RR didn't interest me. I'd never had too much to do with them. I just knew that I hadn't been in an aircraft, and we ended up with another $140 or $145 a fortnight, which is an extra bonus. So I think I went in the aircraft for the first time on my para course, and I was first person, first man, first sortie, first stick, and I was shitting myself, but it was not until my 13th time that I was in the aircraft that I had to land with it on an exercise going to Townsville. So so it was housing commission kid, deprived from holidays overseas and anywhere else in the state. And, the army was giving me opportunities that I'd never had prior to. So,
and I suppose as a young 20-year-old, you 20 at that stage, mate, or it was 21?
I was probably 19.
Oh, 19.
19.
So, mate, you're getting to see a bit and do a bit. And, and then so you then obviously you said you did your para. So you did your para course in 2001, and you then finally get to wear your wings, and that would have been was there a big difference between guys that had their wings and the guys that didn't, or was it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It was all about reputation. Once you earned your wings, you weren't considered a senior soldier as such, but you're on that pathway to becoming a team member. That's the first course you want, and you do get a little bit more respect. especially when you're in polys and doing the company photos and you see guys without their wings, they're either new or broken or had just, and if you didn't have an interest in jumping, or you were totally off it, or just linging, so to speak, you were kicked out. You were moved on to another battalion. That's what we did. Yeah, right. And that's no matter what, everyone wanted to be a part of that battalion. Yeah, just cool. The reputation itself was strong. And it was hard to fit in. Like, there were some pretty significant characters kicking about 3R at the time, and coming out of, even though it was a reputation of, there was like all the Nazi stuff going on, and whether it was rumor or whether it was true or not, so be it. But I wanted no part of that. I just wanted to do my job, and I was lucky enough to be surrounded in some of the best soldiers that I've ever worked with. And, I had the best section commander at the time who didn't believe in, going down to the boozer. The old shat is what we called it. It's where, everyone went down every day, just to get on the piss. And it wasn't about that for him. And he wanted a lot from us. And noting that we were probably gearing up for Timor in the near future, just wanted us to be professional, be fit, be fair, and if you weren't performing, you pretty much weren't coming. So I just wanted to, make the section commander proud. Yep. And that was Gary Robinson. He was 2 Commando, who was injured, a few years down the track. And, and I've always lived up to, I guess, his expectations. When I become a section commander, I was like, what would Gaz do? Yeah. And it'd he'll just take you on a 10K run and run it off anyway. Yeah. But, he was just a senior soldier. He didn't believe in, just that poor culture. He's a respected man, had a family at the time, young family, and we all looked up to him. Yeah. And so, we started bonding as a section, and that was important for me.
So, what year, mate, did they cut away the jumps? What year was that?
Oh, my last jump was around 2007, and there was talk of the battalion and the capability being taken away, and then moved to Townsville. So I think it was 2 years later, maybe 2009-ish, it was moved on. But at that point, I'd moved on to Singleton. I think I went to Iraq that year and then straight on to Singleton. So,
mate, we'll
during that time.
Yeah, right. And, it's a shame that it did, it's a shame it did drop away. And I know probably a lot of guys were a bit upset that it went the way it did. But, mate, we'll go back to, so everyone knows where they were when 9/11 happened, or what were you doing at that time? And can you share with us your first thoughts of what this might mean for yourself and the ADF? Like, what was this time like for you?
Yeah, so that time, as I said before, it was all about our section and platoon work and capability. We were looking to deploy to Timor the next year. I don't think we had dates at that time, and the teams and the sections weren't set. You had to earn your stripes. So where I was around that time was in Canungra doing jungle training. I'd never been in the jungle before, and this was the old jungle training wing that they had at Canungra. It was approximately 3 days in. It was tough. The first thing we set off with is walking up stand 11. For those who have done the Kokoda Challenge, that's Tarlington Range through Kokoda Barracks, Canungra there. Yeah. And it's a massive hill, but you go up the goat track. I was a machine gunner at the time, so I'm way down, double barrels, blank firing barrels, double first line ammunition.
In a world of hurt.
Yeah, in a world of hurt. I'm just this young 19-year-old. I think I might have been 20 at that time, walking up this hill, and I was the only one to the rear. It was all the gunners in the company were just in a locker, cramping up and getting up this hill. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done to that point. Yeah. It was about 2 or 3 days into that exercise that we were recalled, and the rumour around the digging net, we're just sitting around, we're being recalled, we're going back to the tent lines, was one of our members had been injured. I don't know if it was from the company or the battalion, and we thought that's why we were being recalled, and we thought it might have been pretty severe. Yeah. Someone had bumped their head that day and had a neck injury, but subsequently they were casevaced, but that's what we thought we were being recalled for and attributed to. we got back to the tent lines, and then we'd been come through the chain of command. I can't remember exactly how it was told to us, but it was America is under attack. You know, I didn't even know what the Twin Towers were, really. And we didn't see any footage. It was, we're going into lockdown. We're going to sit on the gates, because back then it was, the gates were open. There had no security or anything. You could just drive through the married patch straight on the base.
Very back, sort of,
So we were just told we're going to, we set tents up, and we just took turns in rotation out of the tent lines and to the gates for the next 2 weeks, I think it was, or close to. So I didn't get the opportunity to see the actual footage. It was like 10 to 14 days or something by the time I moved back to Sydney. So yeah, it was quite an eye-opener. We knew we were going to Timor eventually. At that time, I didn't think we'd end up in Afghanistan or Iraq. It wasn't even on the agenda in my head anyway. It was just Timor. I want to get to Timor and be a part of the team. That's all I wanted to concentrate on. So yeah, the exercise was cancelled. We went back to Sydney, and we just started focusing again on Timor. So,
well, I suppose at that time, mate, people probably didn't even know where the Middle East was.
Like, that's right, yeah.
Afghanistan and Iraq, where the hell's that? Like, Jesus, like, and you know, like, I guess, like you say, you were focused on Timor, and like, then the next year it rolls around, you then deploy to East Timor. And what were you doing over there in 2002? What was your role and 3's role over there?
Yeah, so it was a United Nations. It was Unmisset Untayet at the time. So, you know, blue beret type stuff, blue hat stuff. There was very, very rare we put on, you know, a bit of campaign unless we were doing an OP or something on the border. I just considered it hard infantry work. I'd never been overseas before, so just going into that environment, getting off the plane, the smells, you know, the best way I can explain the smell is meagering crossed with burning tyres and stuff. And it's that southeast country smell. And, you know, everywhere I've gone post that, it just reminds me of that place. But it was exciting again. And I made the cut. You know, a couple of guys got cut away from the section prior to that deployment or moved around. So I was pretty proud to be there. And I went over as a machine gunner carrying the heavy loads. I think it was because I could run fast at the time. So yeah, I was proud to carry the gun. And our first patrol through Bobonaro, I just remember feeling things that my body never, felt before. It was like the cramping, and I felt I was going down at times. It was dehydration, but got to where I needed to be, and you'd be pumping the old Juby juice in the powder form into your water bottle and doing it all again the next day. So it was hard infantry work, through the jungles, through the tracks. We would have Hueys as well. We had, I think they were New Zealand pilots at the time. You do insertions, go for 7 days or whatever, but get a resup, move somewhere else. And it was just, you felt like you were in the movie Platoon at times. But it was good. It was a good time to form bonds with a platoon. And we lived in little huts and on stretchers at times. But, and when you weren't working, you're on picket and or trying to source some old, DVDs to watch, or I think tapes back then. Maybe it was DVDs. But yeah, it was even technology, it was minimal. One phone call every week, and you had to register it, and you only had 10 minutes, and I had no one to call really, but my grandparents, and I'd prefer to write. My grandmother and we used to write letters to each other, right. And I've still got all those letters to this day, nice. And I'd give my phone time to the married boys, so so they got a little bit of extra time, and they just write my name down. So that's how it all worked. That's all we had for technology.
So for you, I'm guessing a really rewarding deployment. Like you'd sort of been, I get, and still as a young fella, you're still, still early 20s, like, and probably like I spoke to another veteran this morning before I come up to see you, and he deployed over there too, and he said it was just great infantry sort of, he learnt to become a soldier and hone in on his infantry skills and his craftsmanship before then going, then deploying to Afghanistan years later. He said it was a really good sort of foundation, and I guess same for you.
Yeah, it was. That's exactly what it was. And that foundation infantry work is what we train for, the old philosophy of you're a footy player, you train all year for a game. Imagine not getting on the field. So this was us getting on the field. And I felt that I earned my stripes to be there. I worked hard leading up to it. I had some pretty traumatic stuff happen prior to. My granddad died at this point. I'd also found out that he wasn't my granddad. I was pretty devastated. But it goes back to even before we deployed, I wanted to be on that trip and I wanted to make him proud. He never seen anything of my army career from deployment onwards. So he never seen me, be a successful soldier. He'd never had the opportunity for that. But I remember finding out that weekend that he'd passed away, back to the lines, and we all lived together, ate together back then. We did everything. And I come back to my room. I was a bit upset. I think I was watching Point Break or something at the time on VHS, one of my mates comes into the room and he's just like, "What's going on, mate? How's your weekend?" And I'm like, "Oh, my granddad died." He's like, "Oh, shit." And, next minute he's in the room. He's got bottle of Jim Beam, and then he's told everyone else because we lived on the same floor as the guys who were in your section, and then there's beers in there. This is a Sunday night. The Monday next day it hurt, but straight away the battalion's like, "Okay, go on leave, go to sleep, get some hours of sleep, and then drive back home and funeral, all that." So that was a battalion, and just the boys looking out for me. So I just wanted to go onto that trip and make him proud.
You probably made looking back now, you probably made yourself proud when you come back too. And you got your gong. It was one of the very many gongs that you ended up getting, mate. And people who know, there'll be photos I'll put up with Nate's episode that you'll see. He definitely did get a lot of gongs in over the years at 22 years, mate. You're going to get a lot of gongs.
Yeah, it's expensive changing those things every couple of years.
Absolutely. So, but and then so you come back from East Timor, and then so what happens in 03? What's happening there before you deploy the next year to Iraq?
Yeah, so I was 21, 22 at that point. So Iraq wasn't on the agenda early 2003. So it was just normal continuation training, your normal support courses. And I'd done 3 years at this point. So it was just exercise after exercise. At this point, I started thinking, okay, maybe time to leave. So I considered, separating from the army. I'm done my 4 years. Maybe it's time to become a police officer now. But then I started thinking maybe this is the career for me. Maybe I need a change. I've deployed. So I decided to even put my application in for para-rigger. So rigging up parachutes, because I enjoyed parachuting. I'd still get to do it, but it was a bit more of a low-key job. I was down in Nara, there was a bit of surf, still in the Sydney. I guess I could grasp back into, my family. Maybe I had some separation anxiety back then, I don't know. But I started considering other options, and it wasn't until we were on an exercise later that year in 2003 that we heard that Alpha Company, I was in Alpha Company 3R at the time, that we would deploy to Iraq on Sectet 3. And it was all rumours, nothing completely verified, but it started, getting a lot of traction. And having 3 platoons, we knew that 1 platoon would go. We didn't know which platoon. Later on, it was identified which platoon would go, and the section started forming. The ORBAT started forming on who was going. And I got a tap on the shoulder one afternoon from platoon commander at the time. I can't recall who it was, but he's like, "Hey, there's going to be a reserve section. Do you want to be a part of that?" And I said, I'm thinking about call transferring, maybe separation. He's like, "Well, if you want to be a part of this reserve, we're not guaranteeing you a trip, but you'll have to pull that discharge." So there's a carrot's already dangling. So that's what I did. I pulled the separation, or I think it was the call transfer, whatever I had in then. I think it was both. I didn't know what I wanted. And then, we started training. And we just trained as the 4th section in the platoon, which is great. So we were a bit of a mixed crew. At that time, it was Dane Simmons, who was the section commander. So he's, well-respected battalion member, fit, keen. So yeah, we trained. We did everything that everyone else needed to. We did some training in Singleton, Lithgow, and then it was operational security. We had, it was pretty high. We had to keep it on down low. We couldn't tell anyone what we were doing. We even travelled curtains closed in the bus with our uniforms on because it was a desert uniform to where we needed to go. And it wasn't until the last final mission rehearsal exercise that we were told that the 4th section would actually deploy, which is my section. So I'm like, oh, cool, I'm going to Iraq. And yeah, so I started gearing up for that. The final dental check, though, they determined that I needed my wisdoms out, and I was going on leave. So I'm like, okay, and the battalion was going on stand down as well, so there was no doctors or dentists around to carry out the removal of my wisdoms. I think it was 3 of my wisdoms at that point. So they recalled some doctor. I sat in the chair, and out come my wisdoms. So I recovered just in time to jump the plane and head off to Iraq in January 2004. So,
mate, I tell you, I've listened to that saying like big gamble, mate, when you pull both. And if that trip hadn't come off for you, you'd have been like, you promised me a trip, mate. Like what the,
and it's happened, yeah.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot. That's the army. Sometimes that's how it rolls. That you're all geared to go, and then pull the rug from under you. And so you deploy in 2004, and what was your role over there? What were you doing over there?
Yeah, so it was the security detachment. It was fairly new at the time. It was early 2004, so we'd had Australian troops in Iraq for less than a year. That time, I think Saddam had just been captured.
Yep.
And, it was a bit unknown, but we knew we weren't going into war. We were going in as a security detachment. Just standing around, looking after the embassy staff. My role at the time, I was a number 1 rifleman. So I had a bit of seniority, after the section commander, the 2IC, so Corporal, Lance Corporal, then there was a senior private, which was myself. Even though I wasn't the eldest, I was probably sitting as one of the youngest, 22. It was telling me that I must be doing something right if I'm in a senior position. So we just broke into fire teams, and you'd have certain missions to escort the embassy staff from where we lived is known as the red zone. So the embassy was next to an old hotel which had been abandoned, and the Australian government was renting it out through whoever owned it at the time, but the building ceased when the war kicked off. So we just fortified it. In our spare time when we weren't on task, we were just filling up HESCO baskets, and it was just on the side of the road. You didn't know if a vehicle was going to pull up and detonate. We knew a little bit about vehicle-borne IEDs, and we had a little area, a little AO that we could patrol, so we owned it in the way of we took ownership of that, so we looked after it, and we just tried to fortify the defences as much as possible. And then we would escort the embassy staff across the road to a hotel district every morning and every afternoon, just taking them to and from their job pretty much. And so that was only a 4 and a little bit month deployment, and once a month you would get a break at the presidential palace, Saddam's palace, and they had a swimming pool there, and I don't recall swimming in it at the time. It may have been or abandoned, just green, but it was a good little break for two days. You could just chill out away from everything, and that's where my first interaction with American soldiers and the way they operate, especially their rear echelons. So, right. Yeah, they took everything with them. That's for sure.
I'm guessing like that deployment didn't bring up, like, obviously you couldn't relate to that in Afghanistan. Totally different environment, urban, totally different to what Afghanistan was when you deploy years down the track.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. So, and then, and what was obviously, it was security detachment, but obviously you had your challenges. And what did you learn about yourself on that deployment? Did you?
I learnt the capabilities of, our assets and combined operations. So, we'd had some minor incidents there. We had, a improvised rocket fight. Like, they were teenagers, fired a rocket at the building. Right. We pretty much detained them and threw them over to the local authorities. Never heard what happened to them. You'd always hear what was happening in the area. A lot of celebrationary fire from weddings because we're in the hotel district. Yep. So it was awareness as well, especially the first week we were there. It was every day, and you'd want to put your boots on the stand too, but just become the norm. You could tell the difference between celebration fire and just random shooting. And generally would have someone on the roof anyway at Eagle's Nest on the, I think it was like the 9th floor, monitoring things, including that was us doing 3-hour shifts. And then, but it was the capability of our LAV troops. I think that was the first trip they operated and actually engaged on operations. So, yeah, as far as I can recall, and they engaged across the river, I think it was Tigris River, and at a mortar point of origin. So I don't know if they got the kills up at the time, but it was great to hear that, and we were QRF at the time, so we were getting ready to jump in the back of the labs and go and clear this point of origin, but we couldn't get authority to move across the AO because it was, it was up to the Americans. It was their AO, and it was pretty exciting. So I just it helped me learn about the capability of our brothers in arms and our cav troops, because later on in Afghanistan, they got us out of a lot of shit. So right. Just their weapons and they are their armament itself. It's a capability, and the weight of fire that they can provide, it's second to none.
It's the all arms infantry.
All
arms tactics of planes, guns, armored. Everything that you train, it's all later on. You'd see that down the track. So you come back from Iraq, and then in 2006, you're a corporal now. So you're a corporal. So full corporal or just lance corporal?
Full corporal. So that was a pretty quick transition. I got back from Iraq 2004. I'd already done my subject 1. You need to do your 2 courses. I'd done my sub 1, and then I was promoted just on that 1 course. So I was in a 2IC position 2005, and then I was nominated to go onto my subject 2 to hold the rank. I was always a little bit apprehensive about it. I didn't think I had the ability at that point. I'm like, I want to learn my trade or learn my job as a second in command. But I was bumped straight into the corporal position as a lance corporal. So I never really got to experience too much as a lance corporal, maybe 1 exercise. And I'd always say to my platoon sergeant at the time, I'm not ready. I just want to do my job. He's like, too bad. And he's like, I trust in your ability. I know you can lead the guys. We're talking about 8 or 9 guys here, but still, I'm a 23-year-old kid, to have that responsibility. So I didn't have the opportunity really to do anything as a lance corporal. I was pretty much bumped straight up. So I was promoted in early 2006 or late 2005. I'd got into a bit of trouble back then. I got into a fight at a pub and ended up with 200 hours community service, and an administration warning at the time, but I was still promoted. I was still performing. I did what I needed to do. I did my 200 hours service on my own leave, and, worked in a nursing, I wouldn't say work, but, had to do pay my penance in a nursing home, which was great. I enjoyed, I'd always pop in afterwards to say g'day to the staff and the oldies, but, glass half full. So just a silly mistake I made as a kid, but I was still promoted, and then 2006 come around, and again we were warned out for further operations, and that was
off to the
Sollies. So we were the online company at the time, and we knew Sollies something was going on there, and there was civil unrest. I guess the locals weren't happy with the new government. A lot of Chinese businesses, so they started burning down all these businesses in Honiara. So, and the federal feds lost a little bit of control. They were over there at the time. We got a short notice warning. We'd practiced recalls. We were always on recall. And I do remember ready to step off, and I was going to get a kebab one morning. I think Miss and I had gone out for dinner or something the night before, and then as I'm driving to go get this kebab out of Liverpool, and then I said, I'm going on to base. We've got a recall, and I knew that we would be going, and so I didn't see her for 6 months or the kebab. So 6 weeks.
And then
5 or 6 weeks it was.
And then so you head over there, and then quick trip to the Sollies. And then come back. And so did you ever think of trying your hand at the Special Forces.
Yeah,
And what was your reasons if you didn't go down that path?
I guess during that period, I didn't go down that pathway because I was too busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just bouncing from one thing. There was always a goal, always purpose, always task, always mission.
Yep.
And I knew what that was. And straight after Solly's, it was, we were getting ready for Iraq. The only reason we come back after 5 weeks and left one area for a few more weeks is because we had to get back to start training for Iraq again.
Yeah, right.
So I was warned out that it was by sections. It wasn't, so the company combined, and we needed 6 sections out of the 9 to go to Iraq. And you could pretty much tell who they were, the performing sections.
Yeah.
So my section got the warning order, and we were pretty much already set. We'd already trained, and we'd already been working together in the Solomons. So that was a good little opportunity for us to form that cohesion and that team. There were a few minor changes. So the Special Forces wasn't in my head until later in my career in 2012, where I did give it a crack. So but I can touch on that as we go through. So it was 2006. Back to Iraq.
Right. And what were obviously very different to what you were doing in 2004. And had the country progressed ahead of what it was like in 2004, or had it sort of stayed the same?
The mission had stayed the same. The area and I guess where we were working out of. So they moved from that red zone. That building subsequently was targeted by a vehicle-borne IED, and it was the trip after us, the Sector 4.
Yep.
They got hit pretty hard. Those HESCO baskets we were all filling up. They hit the hardest, the strongest point. Fortunately, it probably saved some lives, even though some of the guys were pretty much knocked down and thrown on their ass. It was a big explosion. Yeah, right. So the embassy collapsed and moved into the green zone, which is known as the safe zone.
Yeah.
So 2006, the mission stayed the same. The changes had been, we worked out of 2 different locations. One is what was known as the Cove, and that Cove is where our LAV troop worked out of, and we would have a force protection platoon there. So we would do the runs up Route Irish, and for those who have been down Route Irish, it's pretty much a rocket run up to the Presidential Palace, where a lot of meetings take place, there's a lot of ministries. That's when we needed that extra force protection, so the ones that weren't inside the green zone.
Yep.
We would use the LAV troop for that, and would always take a fire team or a section on that task. So then I was a corporal as well, so that was the main change is the location. The other location was the embassy itself, so it's where the embassy staff were doing their day-to-day duties, but it was on the same, grid square and the space as the hospital.
Yeah, right.
So, and that hospital, the entry point there was one entry point into the embassy, into the hospital. And that was vehicle access only. So you had an Australian, an American, generally just the hospital staff and, soldiers doing their duties and responsibilities of picket in between shifts or whatever. And you'd have an Iraqi as well. During that time was some of the big battles during Haifa Street, and a lot of casualties come from Fallujah as well. So Haifa Street was a couple K outside the gate, outside of one of the checkpoints. So casualties would come straight down. That's where the Americans, so you had infantry and Marines going door to door in a pretty bad area, and they were copping it.
Yeah.
So if an IED had knocked over a vehicle or members, it would roll through our checkpoint, and sometimes we'd have to do a quick check of the vehicle. So I guess when it come to that's it's the first time I'd actually seen casualties and the impact that metal has on flesh. And it's the only way I can explain it. Every day there would be something. You'd get a warning order that there was a vehicle about to roll in. Sometimes we had Iraqi vehicles come down, and there'd be a lot of apprehension letting the Iraqis in. They'd have to get clearance, and so the vehicle would be outside, and we're trying to do everything we possibly can to help out, carrying casualties, and you'd have mass casualties coming down the checkpoint, like vehicles pretty much on their rims,
The Wild West.
It wasn't a nice thing to see. Children, shot up, blown up, all coming through the checkpoint. would always have gurneys there ready to lift casualties on. So a lot of the boys and girls, we worked with a lot of MPs there, so they were, they were awesome. Yep. Would always be chipping in to help each other. If you're on the checkpoint, and an incident occurred, you feel obligated. You can't just, let the Americans deal with it. We'd get in there and get our hands dirty, and there's a few incidents there where you go to pick up a casualty, and or you're grabbing it as just loose flesh, and and there was one time where I went to lift a casualty and hand went straight into his back cavity. It was just one of those things, and you're just like, oh shit, okay, but you don't want to react. This guy's purely like, they're conscious and they're aware what's going on with them. Yeah. And you don't want to freak them out and go, dude, you got some blood on me. And, and it was great to check on these guys afterwards. And we'd always go over next door to the hospital and go, hey, where are the Aussies on the gate? How are you going? And it was nice to find out that they're okay. But that wasn't always the case. I'm talking EFP. So that was the... the electronic force penetrator. So the bad stuff, that was another major difference, is the componentry that Iraqi or insurgents were using at that time. There was a lot more parts coming in through the surrounding countries, and it was different in 2004. So, and they had gotten very smart in the way they would do things and do business, like directional shape charges, charges that were designed to take out not just the vehicle, but every person in the vehicle, like the crewie, the driver, the occupants in the back. And, these things would just penetrate any armour, and they did absolutely devastating things like to the human body. And that's where sometimes we would open up the back of a vehicle and have a quick look in. We'll let the Americans do all the wheeling and dealing, but we're still also looking for, we'd run a quick mirror under the vehicle in case anything magnetic's on that vehicle, because it's just come in from Haifa Street or from wherever it's come from, and and you'd open it up and you would see some pretty bad stuff. Like, I'm talking decapitations, and and it'd take body parts clean off. It's a force penetrator. It was So a lot nasty stuff. A lot of nasty stuff. So I guess and that wasn't just for me. That was just I'd seen dozens of things like that. So you collectively add that together out of a 7-month period, 2 platoons rotating through. Every one of those guys and girls, would have gone through something similar. So that was pretty traumatic, and I guess that was the main difference for us, is being able to deal with that absolute carnage. And
I guess for you in that sense, mate, too, of like at that stage, like, you probably weren't exposed to that up to that point. Like, so all your deployments, you didn't have that sort of the mass casualties that you saw in 06, 07 period. Like, that's intense, mate. Like, that's a, and like you're saying, it's not a natural thing to see that. Like, and the true carnage of what war fighting is, and that would have absolutely been. And you, I guess, coming back from that trip, you would have been like, oh, geez, I've experienced something, very different to any other deployment that and were you sort of, was it just, all right, I've just got to process, I've just got to keep moving forward, or how did you process it?
Oh, easy, compartmentalize it, pack it away, move on. Yeah, it's just what we had to do. And you'd have a quick chat about it with some of your mates. Go, man, that was pretty freaking bad, eh? So, cool, all right. Let's. What do we got on tomorrow? Yeah, same thing. So, and I get it. You get counselling and psychology support afterwards, but you dismiss it because you don't want to impact future jobs. And
like you said, tick the box. And
tick the box, move on.
Good. Yep, move on.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't go into a psychologist after that trip and go, oh yeah, seen some stuff. Having. I've dreamt about it a little bit. I've thought about it a lot. Yeah. Straight away, medical downgrade. And here's that stigma to go with that, and
the lingerer again.
Yeah. So,
even though it's a natural reaction to, like, as you know, later on down the track, and many years now of what you've gone through post service, you look at it and go, yeah, well, no, I'm not I wasn't that lingerer. There's some serious, post traumatic stress of that. Like, I need to deal with that. But as you say at the time, good to go.
Yeah, good to go.
Let's go. Next.
And that's the thing, and that's what soldiers have always been trained to do. Pack it away. No one's got time for anxiety, depression, evil thoughts, PTSD, whatever it is. we don't have time. Just, crack
Next
on with the mission.
deployment, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, and I get it, and I totally feel for people like yourself, first responders, and who do that day in, day out, dealing with road tragedies, and, I know it's a little bit off topic,
it's it all sort of ties in.
And I feel for it. Yeah. It's, they've got to do it day in, day out, and if you're not out there the next day, someone else is going to have to fill in that position for you.
Yeah. It's I mean, like you say, mate, it's a good point you touch on is that, you're right. I know it from first responders' perspective that you just pack it away and just, righto, what do we got to do? Right, next job, let's go. And it's not until you sit and actually quietly reflect and go, ooh, actually, there's something there, but as you say, mate, so you come back from Iraq, and then in 2007, your first child was born, and how did the birth of your first child change your life? And did you promise yourself that you would give your child a better childhood than what you had? Was that what you promised yourself? Or?
Yeah, that's real good question, because that time I was 6 weeks into that deployment when I found out that my partner was pregnant. So I think I flew her straight to Italy on my ROCFA, so my 10 days off, what it was, and I proposed there. I'm like, okay, you're pregnant, you're 12 weeks pregnant, we might as well get married. And that's exactly how it went. It wasn't anything romantic. 10 days later, I'm back in Iraq. I get off the plane another 5 months post that. And I had to move out of my apartment. I was living in Cronulla, living the Cronulla life on the beach, just had a girlfriend, but still, you live in the batch life. She moved everything into a new home. I'd never seen it before. A new rental in Holsworthy. So in good old Wattle Grove, right next door to it. New furniture. I get off the plane, and there she is with big belly and takes me to my new place. So that was a major adjustment just there. Step off from a deployment, and there you have a fiance who's pregnant in a new home. So that adjustment, I only had 6 weeks roughly before my son was born. And I'd thought about, how I'd be as a father. I read all the books, watched all the DVDs that were out at the time. But honestly, it was just winging it. And I just thought that maybe I can do a better job than my father, who wasn't around anyway. So that's a good start. And I guess I've always looked at it, who were the positive influences in my life, and, what values did they have? And one is my granddad. He was very protective of his family. My step-granddad. So. But, also I had to develop my own values. And I have always said to my kids that, if you ever have any questions, ask. They're at that age now where they're asking a lot more questions, and they've listened to, some of the stuff that I've stated in podcasts or, online. So I don't hide anything from them. It's about being truthful. That's the best I can do. I need to be honest with them at all times. And, that was the best I can do as a dad. And
I think just be a role model, mate.
Yeah, that's right.
That's it. And just sort of guide them through to when they become adults, mate. That's, I think that's what any parent does, and I know my father was the same, he, great bloke. And I still love him to this day, he instilled the values in me that I hold, now very close to my heart. And eventually I hope to give them to my kids, mate. And that's what it is. Just be a role model. And that's, I think, mate, and I like that of honesty is the best policy, and being open and honest, and and I think for your kids as well, mate, and I think for a lot of veterans' kids is, this is what Dad did. Dad went away and he did this, and there's been some up and down, a bit of rocky times, but open and honesty, mate, it's the best
and that's
policy.
right. And when it comes down to that honesty, the biggest thing I faced and challenge that I had when I did leave the Defence Forces, they're hanging out with their mates, and what does your dad do? And it was always, he's a soldier, he's in the army. Mum's in the Air Force, dad's in the army. It's just the way it worked. And once I left, I had to have that conversation with them as, all right, what do you do now? I'm kind of like semi-retired. you know, and things just happen. And so now I try and educate them to, you know, if they are asked the question, what does your dad do? How about, hey, what's your dad like? Why does it always have to be about what you do?
Yeah.
That is just something that you're paid for.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realise that. Maybe it's because I'm not in that position anymore as a soldier. I've had to align who I am with the values. And
I think, mate, I think that's such a good point, because, you know, what's the point of, there's no problem with saying, you know, what does your dad do? Well, he's a veteran. That to me, that's cool. Like, whether you're a first responder veteran or you're a defence force veteran, just put, what's your occupation? Veteran. That, to me, there should be no, okay, cool. No, what did he do? Oh, he was a soldier, you know, and now he's a veteran. Like, I think very key point you touch on that. Yeah, like, it's, why do we have to always say, well, what does he do? To, well, who is he as a person? You know, like, and 100%, mate.
It's just human instinct to, you know, straight away gauge and judge.
Yeah.
And even saying the term veteran is, you know, it's a sticky point with some people, because you tell another teenage kid, or you know, let's say someone who's never been around the military, you say veteran to somebody and they just assume straight away you're old.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 41, 42, and, you know, I tell people I'm a veteran or retired or semi-retired, and they just, you go, what?
Yeah.
You can't be. You're not old.
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah, well.
I think, mate, I think the demographic has changed to what a veteran, you know, like, because of the 20-year period that we, you know, the busy 20-year period that you were in for, people, you know, like, people are understanding it now. They're seeing it a lot more with, you know, the media, and we're seeing, you know, a lot of the veterans have changed, mate. There's, you know, you are a veteran, you know, you're in your 40s, mate, and you've seen a hell of a lot of service in that 20-year period. And it's like, the perception's changing, which is a good thing. It's finally a good thing. Like, you know, back in when we were kids, mate, you said a veteran, you looked straight away at World War I, World War II guys, Korea, Vietnam, you know, those were the type of guys that you associated to, well, they're a veteran. As now, mate, it's changed, totally changed.
And that's right, and it's about education, getting the messaging right. And the more we see in the media of, I guess I won't say young veteran, but the modern veteran. Is probably a better terminology. Is a modern veteran, because we're not all young. It's, you know, it's a modern veteran, someone who's been in modern conflict. You know, it's going to get the messaging right, and, you know, it's going to get across eventually. So maybe, you know, we do look at throwing around and changing the way we communicate it to modern veteran, not a, you know, a veteran.
I like it. So I like it, mate. It's a good way of putting it. That, and, you know, I think podcast, like, you know, doing podcasts, and I think that's the difference I've found, is that from the, and this may sound controversial, but from the World War II veterans to Korea to Vietnam to the modern. A lot of modern day soldiers now are actually, they're more forthcoming with their stories, you know, and sort of, it's sort of a cathartic process for them to, you know, and I understand, look, I totally get the older, you know, I totally get where some of the older veterans don't want to speak. That's fine. There's a lot of modern veterans that don't want to speak as well, and that's totally cool, mate. But I think, you know, the more we educate the younger generations of the modern veterans like yourself and so many others, I think that's only going to educate them, and, you know, they're going to learn so much more from you guys coming forward and sharing your stories. Yeah,
it's because it's definitely more accepted now than what it was, you know, in the post-World War II Vietnam days. It's because, you know, the minute you speak about it, it's associated with a stigma, and then, you know, you're just put in that category. But now it's more accepted, and because people want to listen.
100%.
And that's what it comes down to.
And I think, mate, you've only got to look like 15 years ago. Look at the difference from when you were, you know, when you wouldn't have, like, podcasts weren't a big thing, mate. Like, you know, and it's like, you want to talk to me about my service, like, that's, you know, like, and now it's sort of, we do, mate. That's the thing. Like, a lot of people do want to, because there's so many life lessons that you can take away from your experiences that people in the civilian world can go, we can implement those sort of things. And, you know, so, mate, absolutely. I think the more education